It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm well.
That's the spirit. Anything of note in Hong Kong at the moment?
No, it was all happening in Macau this weekend.
Oh, that's right. Well, you had a major birthday. We don't want to give that away, otherwise we'll be allowing our listeners to commit identity fraud on you. And there might be one or two with a gleam in their eye there, Jack. But yes, happy birthday. It was,
thank you,
mate. A fairly large one, and I hope you enjoyed your celebrations with your family in Macau.
Well, I had a surprise visit from the son, who turned up unannounced.
Yeah, lovely.
So he joined the lads in Macau.
Did you fly to Macau?
No, just went by car on the new road and tunnel bridge. You know.
How long does it take to get to Macau from Hong Kong?
Door to door, about an hour and 20, I suppose.
Really?
I mean, but normally we go by ferry, you know, which is just as quick.
There you go. Had a lovely weekend. Good stuff. Now, we must get on. We've got a huge show. News poll released yesterday. There were a number of polls actually released. But this one particularly bad for the coalition. It's basically, the bottom line is about 58-42, Jack.
Well,
and
a 27% approval rating for the coalition, that's the really bad number.
Most of that, terrible. And most of that vote has gone to One Nation, and Labor's pretty much static at 36% primary vote. And Albo's has gone down a couple of points in his approval rating. He's into negative territory again. But look, it really is starting to look very, very serious for the coalition, Jack. We've talked about this numerous times on the program. Troy Bramston wrote today, there is no guarantee the Liberal Party will survive. It seems many are looking at the electoral map thinking the loss of 40 seats in the dozen years between 2013 and 2025, not including the Nationals-dominated LNP Queensland, is an aberration. In reality, voters are ditching the party in droves, whether in or out of government. In metropolitan capitals, the party is vanishing. The Liberal Party holds new metropolitan suburban seats in Sydney, Barara, Cook, Lindsay, Mitchell, Melbourne, Goldstein only, Perth, Canning only. The LNP held Bowman in Brisbane. It holds no seats in Adelaide, Hobart, Canberra or Darwin. It has ceded heartland seats, some held by the party since 1946, to Labor, the Greens and Teals. Now, some people are aligning the very poor result in their primary vote along with the Jacinta Nampijima Price controversy within the party and her standing down. I tend to think that it's a bigger problem than that, Jack.
Well, it predates that. There's no cause and effect much with that. I mean, it may have had an effect, but it will be a small one. It's not just that the number of seats. From what I can pick up, there isn't really much of a party structure, anymore. This is a problem for all the parties that your local ALP branch was big and boisterous and had a real role in the social community, but that's not true of either of the political parties anymore, but particularly so of the Libs.
Well, when we look at the demographic breakdowns of polling recently, Jack, and there were a number of polls released yesterday, what we're seeing is the Libs really falling behind with women, particularly young women, young people. Their figures, and this gets to Senator Jacinta Nampijima Price's claim. She claimed of an 85% support from the Indian community to Labor, which I don't know. People kept saying that Cos Samaras had said this, but I've been unable to find it in any of his ex postings, and he may have he may have mentioned this verbally on television or something, but where language is, there's obviously no breakdown about Indian voting preference, but where you look at where English is, a language other than English is spoken in the household, you've got about 58-42 there. So pretty much across all demographic lines, except for what we might call the boomers, Jack, the 65 plus, the Libs are well and truly behind, and they've got some really big problems. I think they're on the verge of a split too, not just around immigration issues, but certainly with their coalition partner, and net zero seems to be another point of tension for the Liberal Party, and that's where we're going to next, Jack.
So another United Australia Party experience. They'll fall over and something will rise in their place.
Yeah, and it might not be as pleasant as the Liberal Party. I think that we need to say that. I do know that One Nation, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, is setting up branch structures throughout New South Wales. It's something that they've never had, so they would actually have branch meetings and things like that. They're going to be very interesting because there's a Senate vacancy which will need to be filled by One Nation very soon, and it'll be interesting to see who gets that job. As a bit of a sign as to what's going on in that party.
Yeah, I suspect she carries too much baggage to do what Robert Menzies did and build the Liberal Party out of the ashes of the UAP. But someone else might be able to do it.
I think that for those who don't want action on climate, we'll just go through some polling now and the story about the National Climate Risk Assessment Report and so forth. That they seem to be stoically sort of refusing the fundamental requirements of voters or the fundamental views of voters. And that leaves the Liberal Party, if they go the wrong way, basically vying with One Nation for that particular vote. Which, as I say, that takes us to our National Climate Risk Assessment Report, Jack. I don't know if you've read much of it, but I'll give it to you in brief. The report by the Australian Climate Service included warnings of a more than 400% increase in heat-related mortality in Sydney if temperatures increase by 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, up to 2.7 million days of work being lost by 2061 because of heat waves, a loss of ecosystems, a $600 billion hit to property values by 2050. Basically, a lot of properties will not be able to be insured, a $40 billion a year cost for natural disaster recovery, and flooding risks to areas inhabited by more than 1.5 million Australians. Now, we'll get to this sort of notion of specific projections in a minute, but I just wanted to look at some polling first on climate and where Australians are, Jack. And this is a poll. There was a news poll released yesterday, but a month ago, YouGov poll came out and said that 3/4 of Australians want the government's climate plan to aim to limit risks from extreme weather events like bushfires. The view is shared across the political spectrum, including 3 and 4 major party voters. Just 13% of Australians think the government should do less to limit the impacts of extreme weather events. The news poll largely supported that, not quite as strong as that 77% figure, but a large majority of Australians want government action on climate change. So now we've got this sort of issue of catastrophism, Jack, and I know that might be something that you're interested in. This was a comment from Tony Wood, who's the Grattan Institute Energy Program Director, and the Grattan Institute is a left-of-centre think tank. He said that to be able to say confidently what would happen in 50 years was simply not real. He said, I worked on the first Garneau Climate Review in 2008, and the problem we ran into is there are so many things that we don't know. We don't know how things are going to unfold, and you tend to be, I'm not criticising these guys, the authors of the National Climate Risk Assessment, but you tend to be making it up. Mr. Wood said that he did not believe the NCRA was catastrophising. We're turning a lot of nouns into verbs these days, Jack. Catastrophising the potential impacts of climate change. I think what they tried to do is set out as best as we can see that this is what it's going to look like. That's what Mr. Wood said. So I think that's a fairly reasonable sort of remark to make. You cannot be too specific about projections that are 50 years away or 40 years away, but you can, I guess, at least spell out some of the potential problems that exist.
Yeah, leaving aside the merits, I don't want to get into a long argument about that. The politics of it, you've accurately described them in Australia, and that's where they were in the United States and in particular in the UK up until the last few years. The Tories were every bit as much. In fact, they started the legislation to enforce net zero. Right, so it was a bipartisan thing, and that's one of the. We'll get to the Tories and the Labor Party later. One of the factors that is putting the Tory Party is in more risk of extinction than the Liberal Party now is net zero. There are a number of other factors, things like migration stuff, but the political climate around climate change, if you like, has swung quite dramatically in both the US and the UK. But at the moment, the government's on a winner with this.
Yeah, that's right. I would say too that, look, arguably, having gone to London last year and being in, I always used to be amused that London. It was reported that Londoners were sweltering when it was 28 degrees. But if you go to London and it is 28 degrees, it's bloody hot. But so they are getting sort of warmer. It's obvious, fairly warmer summers than usual. But in the rest of Europe, Jack, there are some really big issues around heat, particularly around the Mediterranean states, Spain, Greece, Italy, etc. Wildfires and drought going through the place. So I think it's I think of the politics of it is pretty much determined by the extent of what we might call climate damage.
That used to be the case. What the politics of it is largely determined now is by cost.
Yeah, different in Spain, different in Greece, different in France, I think too. So the UK. So I've joked to my friends, it's like the Gold Coast now. It's a wonderful thing to go there in summer. However, as you say, the government at this stage seems to have the politics right, and this is indeed putting further pressure on the coalition, and the possibility of a rupture exists. Because Andrew Hastie, who's probably considered the next conservative leader of the Liberal Party, and
he at least looks and sounds right. He's sort of Susan Lee's never convincing, but Hastie, he looks and sounds like a leader.
I thought his conduct around the Ben Roberts-Smith trials, defamation trials, etc., was exemplary. He's a person of integrity. He showed himself to be a person of integrity. However, he said he is prepared to quit the opposition front bench or be dumped if the coalition does not abandon its commitment to net zero. My primary mission in politics is to build a stronger, more secure, more competitive Australia. Energy security is a vital input into that, so that's my bottom line. I've nailed my colours to the mast. I said that net zero policy is a straitjacket for our economy and our country, and I believe that. I'm actually quite passionate about it. So there is another point of potential rupture for the Liberals under Susan Lee, Jack. One of their high-profile people threatening to quit the front bench.
Yeah, it is. He's wrong about the present politics, but if the example of the UK is anything to go by, he just may be ahead of his time in terms of what the Australian politics will look like, because like the UK, I do suspect that the politics will swing when people start really paying more money.
All right. Well, I'm not so sure about that, Jack. I mean, this is a country that is being sort of openly scarred by climate change, and I think that where those real climate change impacts are, people are more and more keenly aware of it. But look, politics that aside, the politics of it is this is another another area of rupture, of fissure in the coalition. I really get the feeling that Susan Ley is being hunted right now.
Yes, well, when she took the job, I think we said that the chances of her being taking the job as opposition leader after an election defeat, no one's ever got to the Prime Minister's chair from there.
Would you given her 6 months?
And very often they don't get anywhere close to an election in that chair. You know,
6 months, Jack.
Yeah, Brendan Nelson was pretty good actually, and he didn't get to go to an election as leader.
Well, we often joked about it. The Nelson, Tom Switzer was his, I think, his chief of staff, and I joke with Tom about. I said, you should write a book about the Nelson months, and it could be that Susan Ley months are upon us too.
Of course, she's not standing between the member for Wentworth and what he wants, which is a very dangerous spot to be standing, generally speaking. Yeah,
indeed. And look, it really is one of those things where there could be a Liberal spill on pretty much any time now. Yeah, anytime. You've got a mention here of the Spring Racing Carnival, Jack, which is upon us now. That period between the end of the footy season and the start of the cricket season.
It is, yeah. No, a lovely bloke who does a bit of podcasting in Melbourne, Ben Carbonaro, and he talks about
fantastic name.
It is, isn't it?
Fantastic name.
But he's involved with the Werribee Football Club and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And he was talking about it being a preview for Cup Week. They're starting out, and you've got to get in form. Yes, and he correctly pointed out that the experienced chaps know that you've got to rest on the Sunday, the Monday, and the Wednesday and the Friday. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
So the horses have to get fit, and the audience does too, Jack. The spectators do as well.
In the years where I used to go I would very regularly go to all 4 days. I could never quite work out whether it was really a racing carnival or sort of a pagan spring fertility festival crossed with Oktoberfest.
You've got to really look at a Melbourne Cup crowd, Derby Day crowd, almost as big in the preceding Saturday, and there's something pagan definitely going on there, Jack.
Yes, there is. But a tremendously good fun, I might add.
Yes, indeed. Yes, that is upon us now, the Spring Carnival, and regarding horse racing's appeal and the amount of money that's being invested on horse racing compared to sports betting and other forms of gambling, there is still time for celebration during the Spring Racing Carnival period. Jacinta Allen, Jack, she's off to China, 5-day trip to China. I did see some people on X, obviously not fans of Jacinta Allen's, saying, "What's she going to China for? That should be the job of the Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister. What are these state premiers going to?" And you go, "What are you lost your mind? They're going there looking for investment."
They are.
And so she's off there. And, of course, others rather darkly thought that she was over there to receive her instructions from her employers, Jack.
Yeah. There certainly can be. I'm not talking about any recent premiers like Dan Andrews, etc., or Bob Carr, but there certainly can be benefits in a couple of visits to China while you're premier.
It's her first trip overseas, by the way. It's her first major overseas trip since becoming Victorian Premier. We'll see what announcements and others mention, of course, the Belt and Road investment scheme, Jack. Thought that might get a revival in Victoria.
Well, that won't happen, but there was a funny occasion in a New South Wales state government where it was decided that the Transport Minister should go, because they were looking. It was the very beginning of looking at the metro in Sydney.
If you want to learn about public transport, go to China. Yeah.
Well, and at this stage, it was suggested to the minister that 3 or 4 days in Singapore, looking at the MRT in Singapore, would give him a feel for what the metro is. Nice and easy, not too far to go. And the problem with that was that the 40-something-year-old transport minister had no passport.
We're going to get to a similar sort of story in Georgia, Jack. No passport. What happened?
Well, no, he just he'd never been anywhere. Never travelled overseas. Which was, and your reaction was the reaction of his staff. I went, what do you mean? You're 40 something. You've never been out of the country, Which, that's perfectly okay. Perhaps he enjoys going to the South Coast for Christmas every year.
I could tell you that a wonderful actress, wonderful Australian actress, Jackie Weaver, she'd been, and her wonderful husband Sean, who I know them both very well. They're lovely, lovely people. They're both living in California now. But when Jackie Weaver was nominated for the Best Supporting Actress role for her for a role in Animal Kingdom, it turned out that Sean didn't have a visa to go to the US, and Jackie sent out an APB to all her friends and said, "Look, does anyone know anybody who can get him a visa within really a space of hours?" And it got done. It got done very quickly. In fact, I think it took about an hour and a half for that to happen. Depends on who you know, of course. And Sean was there to watch Jackie get nominated for her rather brilliant performance in Animal Kingdom. Vic State Libs, Jack, they just can't stop talking about themselves, can they? And we've got Philip Davis, he's the Liberal Party State Director. He survived a challenge by his immediate predecessor, Greg Mirabella, I reckon Greg Mirabella's been in about 12 different contests in the last 4 or 5 years, Jack, and he's lost every single one of them. Maybe he should go and start on his own party. That's Sophie Mirabella's husband, of course.
Yes, yeah.
He lost pre-selection to Sarah Henderson for a Senate vacancy. Got rolled there, and he's tried a couple of times to have a crack at the admin or the party HQ leadership, and come up short.
Years ago, we were in the Swans directors' room for a final against Adelaide, and having the post-game drinks, and this bloke from Adelaide came over to talk to us, and he was like, "We can run a car yard," and they'd won. So the Adelaide people are big noting enough at the best of times. But he was telling us, that he'd had 23 professional fights, and this crusty old South Sydney Rabbitoh bloke who we're drinking with says, "Well, were you any good, or were you just persistent?" And I think Greg Mirabella's in the "I'm just persistent" category.
Yeah, he's come up short again. It was a relatively tight vote. The Australian reported that Davis received about 490 votes out of 897. It concerns me, Jack, that there are actually 897 members of the Victorian Liberals State Council.
Yeah, way too many. Really, if you look at Victorian politics, the Labor government's not going that well at all. It's mistake prone. And they've been there way too long. This really ought to be a slam dunk for a decent Liberal leader to win the next election.
Down in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and look, that was the view. The guys that I was talking to, they're not necessarily political animals, but they were saying, "Gee, this government, it's really got to go." And then I said, "I guess the problem is you don't have really an alternative to vote for." And then they just go, "Yeah, I know, it's terrible." So there's nothing much to go for, and it's a bad state of affairs.
It's still possible.
The polling looks like they'll be re-elected.
Yeah, but it's still possible for the Liberals as well. They didn't have much else apart from Jeff Kennett when the Labor Party again was been there too long, mistake prone. But they need something. They need to put a couple of people in place who are, Jeff Kennett and Alan Stokes, who can get it done.
They seem to get obsessed about things that really don't matter. I don't know if you've seen the sort of brouhaha around the. We mentioned this on the program a couple of weeks ago. There's the machete bins, and they leapt on the idea that the bin that this program was going to cost $13 million. That was the public announcement. And so they divided that by the number of bins and came up with the concept that the bins cost, I think, $300,000 each. And they just kept running around doing this. There's the member for Warrandyte who really needs to pull herself back. She's got terrible body language. There's always this pointing and ranting and all that sort of stuff. And then there's more seasoned politicians who've fallen into this. It turns out that most of that $13 million is designed on a public interest campaign, on a public advice campaign, which costs money, of course, and the bins themselves cost about $300 bucks. No, that's not quite right. They cost about $2,000, and they were built in a privatised prison.
It's actually an excellent thing. Their initial point that these things cost $355,000, right? That was an excellent point to make, even if it wasn't true. It was an excellent point to make for about 12 to 24 hours.
Exactly right. It's exactly what I was going to say.
And then you walk away from it and move on to something else.
They went on for weeks and weeks and weeks.
And got caught into an argument about it, which is just, you just shouldn't
just ended up looking silly. There was one guy, I think he's the member for Caulfield. He was, he's a seasoned politician, should know better. He got stuck into this. He thought he was Hercule Poirot, tracing down the mysteries behind all of this. Media Watch blew them all out of the water, a week and a half ago, and there's still this sort of nonsense around. Anyway,
not that Media Watch matters. There was a time when almost everyone I know used to watch it. I don't know anybody who watches Media Watch.
I think the current bloke's doing a pretty good job. I don't always watch it, and you're quite right. Back in the day, it was a sort of must-watch program if you worked in media. I don't always watch it these days. I'm generally a bit busy on a Monday night anyway. United States, Jack, of course, the Charlie Kirk assassination. It's a lamentable thing on its own, Jack. I wrote last week that regardless of what Kirk said, Kirk's ability to engage his political opponents in debate was something that was almost disappearing, or has probably disappeared for good now in the United States. And if there's no discourse, you really can't have a democracy.
Yeah, that doesn't matter what his opinions were. He shouldn't have been shot. It's really quite simple.
Look, it is as simple as that. But I mean, but Kirk was one of those people, and look, he was provocative, and he had views that I've got a bit sick of listening to people who goes, well, I don't agree with anything Charlie Kirk said, but he shouldn't have been shot. And it's really neither here nor there. He was one of the last people to engage in discourse around. With his political opponents, and in a respectful manner.
He really got his organisation really got going because he'd take a little card table and a pop-up tent out to university and college campuses, right? And he would have a big sign there sitting in front of him saying, "Prove me wrong," and there would be a microphone for anyone to ask him a question. He would have a microphone to answer. As simple as that. And so I'm not a Kirk expert by any means, but from a couple of months ago, a month or so ago, when he went to Oxford and Cambridge, I was interested enough to have a listen to what he actually said for the first time, really. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the criticism of what he says that I've read since he was death don't seem to be well based on what he actually said.
What he said in those Cambridge and Oxford debates, he handled himself pretty well. This is a bloke who went to college for one semester and then dropped out. He's a self-taught.
He certainly was intelligent.
Yeah.
And a good debater. But but all this stuff on social media about the people who say, I don't care what his views are, I'm glad he's dead. But then there's the people who say, well, I didn't like anything he said, but he shouldn't have been killed. And I think they're kind of both wrong. He just shouldn't have been killed.
Yeah, look, and look, there obviously is a shooter in custody, Tyler Robertson, 22-year-old Utah native. he said not to be cooperating with police, which leaves a vacuum of information, and social media is just going to fill that with a lot of disinformation.
Poor old Barry Cassidy got caught by going the early crow on that.
Yeah, look, and there is, it must be said, a fair amount of reaction. I mean, first we were told to believe that he'd been radicalised while he was at university. So that would have been 4 years ago, that he'd been radicalised for the semester he was at, I think, the University of South Utah. At the time of the shooting, he was in his third year as basically an electrical apprentice at a trade college. Unlikely to have been a cesspit of left-wing radicalisation. So that was the first thing that seemed very odd. Increasingly now we're seeing from those people like Governor Cox at Utah and others talk about social media and its impact, particularly on young men, and how it's radicalising young men, be it left or right. We do have this issue of young men despairing about their identities, young white men despairing about their identities, and knowing that the further they go in life that they suspect that they will have no voice. And I think that's really a great way of dragging them into some very radical platform on social media. One person who looked at Tyler Robinson, and you might remember the shell casings and things like that. A lot of that was messaging from games that neither you nor I would be interested or played or be interested in playing. And the thing that caught me about that analyst, who knows as much as you or I do, Jack, but he said that the analyst said, this is a person who analyses extremism, he said, this guy's always online. This guy's pretty much online all the time. And so there is now this reaction, we become obsessed about left or right and whatever that means. And it really, I think we're kind of missing the point that there are some very lonely, despairing people out there who are being sucked into some very, very nasty ideologies on social media, Jack.
I think Barry Cassidy's the lesson here. Barry Cassidy jumped in very quickly and said it was a MAGA thing, right? That this bloke was more
not
MAGA.
A MAGA thing. No. He linked it to the Groyper group, and I would say from my assessment of it, that looks like a distinctly possible form of motivation for him.
Anyway, Barry had to walk it back, and the lesson in this is, don't try and be the first person to get this right. Wait until some evidence comes in, you have a good look at it.
Well, we are going to have, one hopes, he's in custody. He said not to be cooperating. There has been reporting that he was involved in a relationship with a male transitioning to a female. That, again, has been a subject of a great deal of controversy. The good news is that he will present for a trial, or he will plead guilty, and we'll get to know a bit more about it then. I would just let our listeners know, if you want to have a look at some of the more disturbing things on the internet, have a look at what a groyper is. And there's certainly a lot of information coming from friends of Robinson in this vacuum that he was part of that group or affiliated with that group to some extent. All right, moving on. As you say, Jack, we'll know more as we go. Georgia. There was an ICE raid in Georgia, Jack, where 300 South Korean workers were told to, they weren't told to leave the country. They were all bundled up and incarcerated briefly. And then I gather there was a fairly significant intervention from someone in the Trump administration to say, oh, no, please don't do that. They were all offered a return to their workplace in Georgia, a battery facility in Georgia, said to with a significant investment to the state of Georgia, and only one of the 300 odd South Koreans, I think it's 275, said they wanted to stay. So it's a bit of a disaster, Jack.
This was a Korean company making an investment in the UK, and they hadn't
US.
hadn't done their homework on making sure everybody had the appropriate visa.
There's been significant fallout, and what the South Koreans are saying is you need to fix your visa system, because of course the Georgian governor has spent a lot of time. Governor Kemp has spent a lot of time trying to drag investment into his state. This was a big boon for him. It's supposed to employ 8,500 Georgians, and it's not sure.
We're still in the construction phase.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. So it's not sure how far that will go. But the South Korean president, Lee Jae-myung, said South Korean businesses in the US need to build facilities, install equipment, and set up factories, which requires skilled technicians. He added that confusion over the current visa situations for South Koreans would lead local companies to question whether they should go at all. That's a direct quote. So, not good, Jack.
No, the United States is not the only place this happens. It's been known to happen in Oz, but
well, let's not be blind to this. I mean, this is part of a program instituted by ICE. They receive phone calls from people saying, "Oh, there's a lot of people over there don't look like me," and then they go and raid the place.
Well, I don't think they do that. What they would get is some
Absolutely
information.
They did. I can point you to the person who made the phone call.
Yeah, but that wouldn't cause them to turn up. What they would be looking at is, do the people have visas? And they can check that quite easily.
And this is one of their largest operations. So the 300 South Koreans, Korean Airlines, courtesy of the South Korean government, provided exit flights to every single one of them. It's a disaster, Jack. I mean, it's really, really poor. And what the South Koreans are saying, we have been misled about the nature of our of what visas are required for our workers.
Well, I'd like to see some evidence of that. They shouldn't.
Well, the state of Georgia has told them this is what you need to do, and then ICE has told them no, that's not right. That's the position. So,
I mean, I don't know. Do they have a lawyer involved? Because the state of Georgia doesn't issue visas.
Well, it doesn't come down to law anymore, mate, because they've all gone.
Yeah.
They've all gone. Okay. Meanwhile, Jack, US agriculture. This is just a little piece from USA Today. Heath Donner's family farm in the northeast corner of Arkansas in Mississippi County, roughly 3,300 acres of land, managed by Donner, and his father produces cotton, corn, soybeans, and peanuts. Donner already anticipated challenges heading into the year amid inflated operating costs and weaker crop prices. Historic flooding in the first half of 2025 only made matters worse, wiping out as much as 25% of his corn yield. He's in big trouble. Donner, a fifth-generation farmer, is no stranger to the business's ups and downs, but said this year is hitting farmers especially hard. One trade group is calling it an economic crisis hitting rural America. I've heard other commentators talk about this. It's as bad in farming now as it was in the 80s, Jack, where, we had farm aid and groups like that getting around to support farmers who were losing their lands. Donna said, I've been around this my whole life, but it is as dark as I can remember. We have to remember, too, that China's orders of soybeans, Jack, have just disappeared from, China's orders of US soybean have disappeared. And it was $13.2 billion worth of soybean last year, and it's zero this year. And this is obviously a consequence of the tariffs. Inflation figure was up. We mentioned this in the program last year. Inflation figure was up from 2.7 in July to 2.9 in July. But that figure, from 2.9 to from 2.7 in July, 2.9 in August. But that figure is almost being overwhelmed by the fact that consumer sentiment is at a 5-year low. I'll just read this from FX. The week ended with a softer than expected University of Michigan consumer sentiment for September, while 5-year inflation expectations surged Friday's data, along with Tuesday's 911K payroll revision and an increase in people filing for unemployment benefits in the US, outweighed inflation data released during the week. You know, they're not on the verge of stagflation here, Jack.
And the economy is most important. JD Vance, should we look at having a good look at this?
We will be covering this, Jack. We will not be remiss. We'll be having a look at the US economy because it is, you know, particularly with the tariff regime that's in place there. It's very, very interesting to see how an economy responds, a massive economy like the United States, and globally where it goes too. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Well, the Chinese figures yesterday were not good either. Which maybe have the same course.
Yeah. I mean, I know the Chinese are moving some of their trade arrangements, like soybean, for example, is coming from Brazil now and things like that. But it's still going to come at a cost. It's still going to come at a significant cost. Big news in the UK, Jack. Big rally, 100,000 strong rally in London, and basically an anti-immigration type rally led by Tommy Robinson, Jack.
Crowd much bigger than 100,000, I would say. I watched a fair bit of video of it. And yes, it was a Tommy Robinson, what's his name, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, organised thing. But I don't think he can draw a crowd that big. And I had a look at Trevor Phillips, who used to be the the race relations commissioner in the UK, appointed under Tony Blair. He's now a TV journalist.
Yes.
And a very good one. He went and spent 2 hours there, as did Konstantin Kissin as well.
I saw his monologue or editorial on Sky News.
And his view was the most alarming aspect of the event was just how normal the vast majority of the marches were. The sort of people you'd meet in a country pub or at a halftime queue for the loo at a concert. Right? And that, to me, had a kind of a ring of truth, because I really don't think Tommy Robinson can pull what was well in excess of 100,000.
Well, I hope not.
So what I think this is much more of a measure of, I mean, I watched the overhead shot from the TV thing, and it took, 3 or 4 minutes for the chopper to cover the crowd in central London. Right? They were in all of the streets that, you know, those of us who've been there know. And I think this is not just about immigration. It's about dissatisfaction with government as it is in the UK, not just the Labor government, but of the Tories as well. And the polling backs that up, that people have lost faith in both major parties.
Well, is it any surprise, Jack? Is it any surprise? I mean, the UK, the people of the UK, they've been dudded over Brexit. You know, they voted for it, but they voted for it not for economic reasons, and they were never given a solid reason to do it, other than some sort of tilt at or some sort of grab at patriotism. So they've lost significantly there. The problems are, as you say, they're economic. And through these economic failures, certain groups will always find a target to persecute, and really it's immigration. So you've got, you know, a whole issue here. I mean, do you know how many asylum seekers came into the country last year? It's a minuscule amount, and the amount of money spent.
50,000.
50,000. Yeah. How much of the government spending is designated to that 50,000? How much percentage of their budget? I mean, it's minuscule, right? So
it doesn't matter.
Well, if you're saying perception overpowers reality, you're probably right. But that heart of the problem is economics, and they've shot themselves in the foot over Brexit. They've left the common market, which was, you know, at least keeping their growth alive. They have significant trading problems now with Europe just across the channel. They have significant problems in finding markets. I mean, it's essentially finance that's keeping that country alive, banking and finance that's keeping that country alive. And if that goes, then God knows what happens. I mean, if the great shift happens and world finance moves to Singapore, where does that leave England?
Well, that's not going to happen because no one quite trusts the Singaporeans that much. But it doesn't matter whether it's 50,000 or 10,000 people coming across the channel by boats. It's the same thing as it was in Australia. It's a law and order issue. People don't like the law-breaking aspect of it. And immigration is part of what this crowd's about, I think. They don't like the costs associated with net zero. They don't like the economy. They think the government's not much good, but God knows the Tories were perhaps worse. And they don't feel like they're being listened to. The net zero thing's important because both parties pursued the same policies on it. And a lot of people don't agree with it. And they're not feeling listened to at all. They're not feeling represented at all.
Well, yeah. Again, I think that these are your bugbears, not necessarily those of the UK. I mean, when you look at the protesters, their grievances relate to immigration. Their grievances relate to their own economic circumstances. Their grievances relate to a feeling of powerlessness and futility. I mean, I haven't seen too much, by way of expression about climate change policy and net zero and how that's affected them. I mean, if you want to look at something that's been absolutely disastrous economically, it's Brexit. It's been an absolute disaster.
Well, that just doesn't resonate in the UK. They don't talk about it, but they
don't
do
talk about it. But
they
the consequences are there. The consequences are there.
The cost of energy policy all the time. Right? So this is there. Anyway, it was a huge
reporting, I haven't heard anyone talk about cost of energy. It's Richard Burgon, who's a Labor MP. He said, we are in an incredibly dangerous moment. We don't only, this is, I think, alarmist, but I don't think it's that far away from the case. We are in an incredibly dangerous moment. We not only face the threat of a far-right government coming to power for the first time in our history, but also a violent far-right street movement on a scale not seen here in decades, if ever. This street movement, led by convicted criminal Tommy Robinson, is especially dangerous for Black, Muslim, Jewish and other minority communities, and we need to build the broadest possible opposition to it.
Yeah, Richard Burgon would be the worst person I've ever seen elected to the House of
Commons. Well, I tell you what, I did watch a little video that's gone viral in the UK at the moment, and this is a rather old, retired fellow in Northern England, and he knocks on the door of a Muslim neighbour, and he says, I just want you to know that you can come to my house as a form of sanctuary if ever things get too hot. And it's a rather lovely exchange, very awkward. He says, are you a Muslim? And he says, yes, I'm a Muslim. And it's a conversation handed through between the front door of this property and filmed on a doorknob camera. And he says, look, I just want you to know that if you're ever in any trouble, you can come to my place and you will be safe there. Just pack a bag and come to my place. And the Muslim fellow says, my wife can't go to work today because it's just not safe for her on the streets.
Yeah, well, I'm not buying this was 500,000 racists and anti-immigration people. Just doesn't stack up.
Well, it's a significant element, Jack, and we've seen that in their riots. And really, I mean, that's kind of the way it is. There's an enormous amount of grievance, but much of England's problems, much of the UK's problems, are of their own design, and they've just exacerbated some of their problems. You know, the sort of numbers you talked about in terms of immigration or refugee numbers, it's a pittance compared to what Spain absorbs. It's a pittance compared to what France, Greece, Italy absorbs.
But none of those countries are as wedded to the rule of law as the UK is. That's the difference. Or Australia, for that matter. It was killing governments in Australia.
What do you mean
and it's a
by
law and
that?
order issue.
That there's this sort of lawlessness and anarchy in Mediterranean states? I mean,
No, I'm saying it just the UK is like Australia. If you have, we had 25,000 people arrive 1 year, and there was no government was going to survive that.
I remember writing about it at the time. It was like they had lost control of immigration, and that's something. I mean, that again, it was they were on track for 50,000 per annum over a June-July figure. Over 2 months' worth of figures, you could extrapolate that to be 50,000. So you might be right on the 25 in the first 6 months, or 7.
June-July figures are the nice season to be coming from vote to.
They were particularly high, and it was like the government had lost control of the borders, and that does cause great alarm in any country. And I understand that, and I'm not suggesting that of the 100,000 plus marching that they are all racist, but I'm saying there is a significant element of racism within those crowds. But it is very dangerous times, and I think that's about right. Will Starmer survive, Jack? Because there's actually been calls from within his party to go.
They have.
So,
and that's because he's mistake prone. The latest problem he has was the appointment of Peter Mandelson, the Blair era advisor and then politician. And Starmer appointed him as ambassador to the United States. And Mandelson has a long association with Jeffrey Epstein, dating back many years. And that's a disaster. That relationship, a bit like Prince Andrews, continued after Jeffrey Epstein's conviction. And
well, after his first conviction, he was continuing to talk to him after he was charged in the 2019 matters. Yeah,
and when he was on remand, I think he was still in contact. Right?
Yeah. Oh, he said it was all. Oh, he told me it was all a bit of a frame up, and he just went, "Oh, yeah, okay. Well, what? Just child sexual abuse, prostitution, soliciting children for prostitution. Oh, I'm sure it's all a big pile of nothing." Yeah, and none of this just terrible.
None of this was particularly secret at the time, and Starmer, not only did he appoint him, but when he was challenged on this, he went into Parliament and said that, no, we've vetted him, he's been through the process, and he was okay to be appointed.
How do you get through a vetting process with that, Jack?
Yeah, and you don't. And Starmer's best defence is that, well, I was told the wrong thing by my staff, and that's not much of a defence because you're responsible for what your staff do.
It's a terrible defence.
Yeah. And yet he's hanging on because he's a very loyally sort of fellow. I watched his interview on this, and he's got enormous faith in, we went through a process, as though that absolves you from any responsibility because you went through a process.
It's a real sort of, if you forgive me for interrupting, it's a real prosecutor's understanding or it's their view of politics. It's a real prosecutor
view of the world.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental.
We have a process and we stick to the process.
But the problem with that is people leap from that to say, and they should stick to a process.
Well, if you're a prosecutor, you should. But if you're a politician, you sometimes need to change and amend.
Yeah. But even if you're a prosecutor, you stick to the process, but you have to exercise judgment. And that's what he hasn't done in this. It's, what's this going to look like? Even if, technically speaking, he could slide through the process, although I can't see how he could, Mandelson could slide through that process. If you're the Prime Minister and you say, well, we're going to make him the ambassador to the US, it's not like you're sending him to some godforsaken country where no one will ever hear from him.
It's probably the most critical foreign affairs appointment there is from the UK.
Well, it is for Australia as well. Yeah, being the person who gets the Washington jobs got the most important job in foreign affairs,
particularly in the context of the Trump administration. Yes, you need to be.
So it's
Well, maybe that's why I got the gig. Lots of buddies from the Epstein files, mate.
yeah, but look, who knows? But and Trump's going to be in the UK this week.
Yeah.
But all the gossip that gets to the papers from the UK Labor Party is that they're all casting around to see
I'll get
who
to
would
that
be
in a
next.
minute. I would say that the only area where you could say as Sir Keir Starmer is relatively unblemished is in his relationship with Trump. But elsewhere, it's been nothing but disastrous. Clive Lewis, the MP, Labor MP for Norwich, has been the first to publicly call for the PM to go. The left wing backbencher, he's from the left, he said, "You see a Labor Prime Minister who feels that he's lost control within the first year. This isn't navel-gazing. This is me thinking about my constituents, this country, and the fact that the person who is 8 points ahead of us is Nigel Farage. That terrifies me. It terrifies my constituents, and it terrifies a lot of people in this country. We don't have the luxury of carrying on this way with someone who I think increasingly, I'm sorry to say, just doesn't seem up to the job." We could go on,
well, both the left and the right seem to be. He's managed to unite the left.
Kim Johnson, if I've got this correct, Jack, is from the right, and the comment there is that trust is eroding on pretty much a daily basis in Starmer's ability to do his job, lead the country.
One of the things he's got going for him is that, unlike Australia, you can't just call a party meeting of the caucus and vote him out.
Well, we're finding this out with the appointment of we're not finding it out, but it is becoming clear that with the appointment of his deputy.
Yeah,
there's it involves the entire membership, and it involves the Labor HQ or the administrative wing of the party to sit down, create a ballot for its financial members, and that's it.
And I think we won't get a result until mid-October for that. Yeah. And the process to replace a prime minister is even.
It is, if I might just take you off on a little bit of a tangent, it is why you and I hate these rank and file votes, Jack.
Yeah,
it just doesn't allow the flexibility to adapt and change with changing circumstances.
Yeah, and our system, as it's been practiced in the past in Australia, you call a meeting, it's going to last for 2 hours, and you walk out with a new prime minister or a new deputy prime minister,
or indeed the prime minister receiving the support of the majority of the caucus. So it's as good a mechanism as any. The members of the caucus are not just. They are elected officials by the country, not just by Labor members, but they represent the Labor Party. I've never understood it, to be honest, why you've got to go to the rank and file to get the nod on a leader or a deputy.
That's particularly the case these days when party memberships are so low. The rank and file are fairly unrepresentative of the wider community, whereas
you would be well aware that you could sneak 20 or 25 into a branch and you'd take it over.
Yes, exactly right. I've observed this
at close quarters, Jack.
Close enough quarters, but yes, it's just not a good idea. And their problem is, who do they replace him with? The candidates for the deputy or the previous deputy, Angela Rayner, are probably all unelectable as leader. So they've got a real problem. But, that's where they are.
It's just hard to believe, Jack, with that sort of stonking majority, that the problems that Anthony Albanese has with his stonking majority. I mean, he's announced that apparently the church who owns the property where his electoral office is in Marrickville is basically withdrawing the access to it because apparently the car parks, people can't get in and all this sort of stuff. And it's because of a lot of protests outside. Albanese's been criticised for basically closing down his electoral office, and I'm sure it'll sprout up somewhere else. There are rallies on the streets every week. For the last three anyway, often of that anti-immigration bent and all this sort of stuff. But yet Anthony Albanese seems to be unharmed by all of this. When we get back to the polling, and as you said earlier, the Tories are probably in a shakier position than the Libs are.
Yeah. So far as Starmer's concerned, I reckon that the number's almost in the frame when The Guardian says it's becoming increasingly hard to find anybody in the Labor Party who will argue that things are going anything other than disastrously for the government. The problem won't be solved by the process. Starmer will be forced to resign, I think, will be the answer.
And then we have that whole issue of who's going to incredibly lead the country. But also it would mean, look, I know you've got a flea in your ear about energy policy, but it would also mean that Labor would have to walk back a lot of its policies, taxation policies, for example.
Yeah.
So because their immigration, we know this through the Tory period, 15 odd years in power. The immigration and asylum stuff, it's just not easily fixed. I mean, you've mentioned a few things that can be done in our last program, but it's just not as easy as fixed as it is for us in Australia with Manus and Nauru. And Labor is shuffling people off to Nauru as we speak, Jack.
Yeah. Even so, for all the UK Labor's problems, they're in less trouble than the Tories.
70% of the vote, something like that.
Something I hadn't thought about, but I know to be true. The Conservative Party in the UK is the most successful political party there's ever been in democracies, anywhere, anytime. It's won more elections, spent more time in government than anybody else. But yet, if they're not dead, they're teetering on the brink. They just lost one of their serious politicians, Danny Kruger, has defected to
Is that
Reform.
in Wales?
No, he's from England.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
And he says it's over. He's he's quite well known. He's the son of Prue Leith from Bake Off. So he looks right, all that kind of stuff, and he's a serious politician. And he's just decided, no, there's no future in the Tory party. I think they're over. I'm going to Reform.
Well, what about a revival of classical liberalism, Jack? What about something like that? What about small L liberalism, practiced by Churchill back in the day before he became a conservative? There was a certain nobility about all of that.
Well, that's certainly possible, as indeed, we were talking about Australia before, as indeed, if the Liberal Party does fall over, what replaces it? It's kind of an open book.
Mm. Well, I think the Liberal Party succeeds when it is, to use the terrible Howard cliche, the broad church, where you've got a mix of conservatives, hard-nosed conservatives, and small L liberals, centrists, and social policy progressives.
Well, that's true of the Labor Party in Australia. It succeeds.
It's just trying to keep the whole thing together.
Yeah.
And it must be said too. I'm getting back to focusing on the Australian Liberal Party. They're being sabotaged from within, largely. Based on ideological grounds. I won't go into names, but it certainly is happening. But a very small number of people are dictating what should be going on in the party.
Yeah,
and that's dangerous.
You need a bit of leadership, I would call that, at the top. But, even...
But they're not parliamentary members, Jack. They tend to be high wealth individuals. Let's start with that.
Well, yeah. In my time in the Labor Party and in the Socialist Left, we used to joke that it was 4,000 factions of three. But so divided was it that... but you had to try and weld enough of that together to make a political party. And when you do, that's very successful because you reach out into all parts of the community, right? But it's also very hard to pull off. So if you get it wrong, then you fracture like the Liberal Party is in Victoria and like the Tory Party is in the UK.
Well, and if we want to go a little bit further, have a look at the Western Australian Liberal Party, which has essentially ceased to exist.
Yeah.
just
But
minor,
but there
not
there
even
is,
party status. They're actually gifted party status.
yeah. But there is always an opportunity on the centre right of politics in Australia and in the UK to have a viable alternative. It just requires a bit of energy and effort to put it together.
And perhaps less of a fixation on ideology, Jack.
Yeah.
All right, France. Let's talk about the French. Of course, last week we reported that the Prime Minister had lost a vote of confidence in the French Parliament. And
Just before we leave that politics thing, it applies to the Democrats in the United States. If they stopped reacting to every tweet from Donald Trump and started talking about economics and the cost of living, they wouldn't have a 17% approval rating. They'd be going pretty damn well, but they can't.
I think that's for the Congress generally. But you're absolutely right. I mean, part of Trump's populism is that it's just this sort of art of not of the deal, but art of the distraction. That he can basically just send them into hysteria over a true social post. But they should be focused enough to stay. This is the economy. This is, these are some of the things that are going to be terrible for Americans going forward, and those things are starting to manifest themselves now. Stick with the economy, and look. Yes, the Epstein stuff is baggage, and it needs to be properly examined. Of course, Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, demanded that the files be released unredacted, and those things are going to those are the two main things going on at the moment. There may be further scandals. Kash Patel's before the Congress this week being grilled, and I think Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s got some problems there too. In fact, the American College of Family Physicians has called for his resignation. Leave those groups to do that, and the Democrats just focus on the economy. And that will be enough, I would suggest, to get them into a pretty good shape for the midterms. France, Jack.
They're not going to do it, so we can give them the advice, but they're not going to do it.
Okay, yeah, they can't seem to help themselves. President Emmanuel Macron has named close ally Sébastien Lecornu, magnificent French name, as the new French Prime Minister 24 hours after a vote of confidence. We talked about this last week. Ousted Francois Bayrou as head of the government. Lecornu, 39, was among the favourites to take over, and he has spent the past 3 years as Armed Forces Minister, focusing on France's response to Russia's war in Ukraine. So, is this stability? Well, of course it isn't, because at least Macron, for all his faults, understands that the French budget, forget about the UK, the French government spending is pretty much out of control. And if they don't rein it in, they are going to become a real problem.
Yeah, and the problem is that all of those measures are amazingly unpopular. Even the minor ones are amazingly unpopular. He would need to get the socialists on board to support him for the thing to have any legs at all.
Going to be hard to nail that jelly to the wall, Jack.
It is, but he's got not much prospect, nor would he want to get the Le Pens, etc., on board. So that's his only prospect.
Yes, indeed. All right. So new leadership in France, same problems. Of course, probably the big news of last week, Jack, was that
be like appointing a new captain at West Coast, mate.
I reckon they're going okay. West Coast, they'll be all right. We've got a couple of blokes coming over to Carlton we like. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, he's asserted full responsibility for the IDF attack on the Al Udeid air base, which caused something of a problem for Israel.
The attack wasn't on the airbase; it was on Hamas headquarters. Nearby.
It's unclear if President Trump knew of it in advance. I would say no from his reaction.
My view of that is that it was so close to the airbase that it's impossible that he didn't know, because not even the Israelis, clever as they are, would be hitting a target that close to an American airbase, because you would be drawing a response.
Well, yes, we've talked about
So, for me, it's
Netanyahu. I mean, this you might be true that it might be the case that the US got a heads up, but in that sort of rat's maze of information, Jack, Pete Hegseth and others, who knows what's going on. But, there is certainly a view that Netanyahu is largely acting unrestrained now, and that, his only forms of restraint are the extreme, the members of the extremist parties who keep him in power.
Yeah. Personally, I think certainly the US government knew, and I expect Trump did as well. They mightn't have been happy about it, but perhaps they were in a situation. Yeah, perhaps they were in a situation where we don't really like this. We're not happy about it, but we won't do anything about it, right? And won't do anything concrete about it.
And we're talking about
what really matters now is what do the Arab neighbours do? What do they think? They're the most important people in this. Have been from day one.
Well, let me give you some scenarios, Jack. The Qataris in 2023 indicated that they were prepared to invest $3.3 trillion in the United States over the ensuing decade.
Yeah.
They made another announcement about a $500 billion investment during the Trump administration, during their conversations with the plane as a gift and all that sort of stuff. Like the South Koreans in Georgia, they're going to say, well, what have you done for me lately? I mean, what are you doing for me now?
They'll have a look at it. I noticed the other Arab neighbours have been sort of supportive of Qatar, but they're all exasperated with the Qataris because they think the Qataris have been too close to Iran and propping up the Palestinians, which the Arab neighbours don't want. So it's a very complicated situation, and I think even people on the inside won't be too sure how it's going to work. But that's where the solution lies. So, as always, right from the beginning of the Gaza conflict, look to what the Arab neighbours are doing.
Yeah, that's always very, very solid advice. And again, Saudi Arabia has indicated that they are willing to invest significantly in the United States. And all these things are on the table.
And very importantly, even post this, the Egyptians were keen on the idea of having an Arab and Islamic kind of peacekeeping force of some kind in the Middle East. Now, who knows whether that will just be an idea that's floated for a day or two or it will hang on, but it's important.
All right. Okay. Well, now let's lighten things up a little bit with a look at sport. We had a bit of a dip into it with the horse racing and the Spring Carnival, but it is getting towards the pointy end of the AFL and NRL final series. Before we start, of course, the Wallabies had a loss. Bit slow out of the blocks again, Jack.
They managed to finish the weekend still on top of the rugby championship table, and that's because the Saffers absolutely monstered the All Blacks.
Smashed the All Blacks. Yeah, saw that. Yeah, so the Wallabies still playing really good football to watch. Did check out the replay on that. Of course, well, we'll start with the NRL because the game between the Raiders and the Broncos on Sunday was one of the best games of sport you'd ever want to see, just up and down. And it looked like the Raiders were absolutely cruising with about 15 minutes to go of normal time. Broncos weren't having any of that, scored repeatedly. Then we went into extra time, 5 minutes each way. Still had not come up. In fact, the Broncos levelled the scores in normal time on the basis of, it wasn't a dubious penalty. It was certainly there, and evened up the scores from a kicking offence, basically. So it teetered and totted and went either way, and you wouldn't have had a quid on either side. And then we finally got into the sort of golden point where just someone has to score. And the Raiders crossed the line. It was disallowed. And and the Broncos ended up getting the chocolates with a field goal. Just a wonderful game.
Yeah, Betfair, bet on these games in
Live.
play.
Yeah.
And I think the hold on that last bit was something like $20,000.
And it was a coin toss.
Yeah, and at one stage, I think the Broncos were 100 to 1. So someone has taken 100 to 1, the Broncos, and got a win.
Watching the game with, let's say, with about 15 minutes, 20 minutes to go, it just looked like the Raiders were going to cruise. So they did take the foot off the gas, or perhaps Brisbane were just irrepressible. But it did look like they were cruising to a fairly solid victory, but it came out the other way. Just a wonderful game of sport. This is part of my theory, Jack, that I'm a big AFL fan. Probably NRL is my second or third sport to watch of the footy codes. But when you get a good NRL game, it's just probably the best of any of the codes, I think.
Yeah, well, I always think that about rugby. A great game of rugby is a really great game of sport. The trouble with rugby is that an ordinary game of rugby is just woeful.
Yeah, and look, the NRL does have its fair share. I remember when I was the website producer for the NRL, Jack, I watched a game from the Auckland Warriors and the then Northern Eagles, and fair dinkum, I must have been the only one watching. It was just a shocking display, shocking exhibition of elite rugby league.
It's a bit like the soccer in Australia. You think no one's watching it, but I walked into our local jockey club a few weeks ago, or it might have been a year ago, to put some money in an account, and there's 50 or 60 Chinese blokes sitting around. They have little kind of like school desks, single-person school desks.
And they'll have a punt.
And they're watching the screen, and they're all invested in it. There's a fair bit of cheering and carrying on. And I look up, and it's the Central Coast Mariners playing.
You don't even get to that point. You can get to like third grade soccer.
Yeah.
Victorian, the Vic Soccer League.
Yeah, I can guarantee you.
And someone's having a bet on it.
None of these blokes could have found Gosford with a map.
There were a few turned up in the Victorian Soccer League who were pretty highly rated professionals in sort of somewhat nondescript. Just wonderful with the NRL keeping going. Melbourne had a reasonably good win. They've still got some issues. I thought the Sharks were very good against the Roosters. Perhaps the Roosters disappointing. Their form had been very, very good in the lead-up. I guess so too was the Sharks. The Sharks defensively look very strong. The Panthers, the Panthers are just there just to, the Panthers are there just to freak the others out, I think. And look, when you look at it, you think, gee whiz, it could be a Melbourne-Penrith grand final again.
Could be.
Sharks doing nothing wrong. And look, we'll see how the Raiders bounce back, but Brisbane have done nothing wrong either. So really getting to the pointy end there. In the AFL, we're a week ahead, of course, of the NRL in terms of the final series. Yeah, Adelaide Crows, Jack, finished on top.
A week and a decade ahead, really. Finished
on top and won I think they still award is it the McClellan Trophy for the home and away, finishing on top after the home and away season?
Well, the McClellan used to be who had the best points in the first, seconds, and thirds back in the day.
Well, I may be wrong about that. I thought there was a trophy award for
the
side
but
that
it
finished.
might have been morphed into as we no longer have the seconds and thirds.
No,
it may just be that.
So they were on top at the end of the season. We can definitely say that, and they finished fifth, bundled out in straight sets, beaten by Collingwood and beaten by Jack, a very scarily young, talented Hawthorn outfit.
Yes,
they're very good, aren't they? They are impressive.
And Jai Newcomb again in his fourth final. Again, the highest rated player. He hasn't been every final he's played. He's been the highest rated player on the ground.
Rowan Weddle, not Rowan Weddle. I think that's his dad or his uncle.
Josh Weddle.
Josh Weddle. He's going to be a superstar.
They got a fair bit of talent.
Yeah, they got plenty of talent.
So who wins this weekend?
Well, who have we got? We've got
Hawthorn and Geelong.
Hawthorn, Geelong. I think, just on form, I think Geelong are probably 20-point better side than anyone in the comp.
Yeah.
But irrepressible Hawks, better than as good as half a chance anyway. And then we've got Collingwood and
Brisbane.
And Brisbane. And my money's on Collingwood there.
Yeah,
I just think the week off will have helped. Brisbane did nothing wrong in their win. They were impressive against the Suns. They're both very open games. But I'll tip Collingwood and I'll tip Geelong to be the grand finalists.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of those, to be quite honest. Although, as you say, if neither of them win, I'm not going to fall off my bar stool.
No, exactly right. So, that just about takes us out, Jack. You've got something here from H.L. Mencken, a wit, if ever there was one.
Yes, I like this. It's an epitaph.
Well, tell us first who H.L. Mencken is, please.
The sage of Baltimore. He was, I don't know what he did in his early life, but he turned into a newspaper columnist later on and wrote till he was quite elderly, I think. And he, if you like pithy, wry humour, he's your man.
Noted for it. What do you have to say?
I like this. This is what he said he wanted on his grave. If after I depart this vale, you ever remember me and have thought to please my ghost, forgive some sinner and wink your eye at some homely girl.
Oh, that's a bit racy, Jack.
It probably is. It's the second best one I've ever read. The best epitaph I've ever read was one from Spike Milligan. Do you remember Spike Milligan?
Yes, I do. One of the greats.
And especially if you're from Woy Woy, if you're a Central Coast person, he was.
Yeah, that's where his mum used to live, and of course the Goon Show. I grew up listening to the Goon Show on the radio on Saturday morning.
Yeah, and I think his brother worked for News Corp in Sydney and lived on the Gold Coast. Lived on the Central.
Might be the case.
Yeah. Anyway, Spike Milligan thought that his epitaph should be, "See, I told you I wasn't well."
It was the wonderful Spike Milligan. Milligan, of course, Cleese and others of the Monty Python Brigade were writers for Spike, and so they had this sort of long association with him. But yeah, look, it was always between junior cricket starting and senior cricket starting that I'd be at home getting ready for the afternoon, and Mum would have the Goon Show on, and she'd be driving me around and all that sort of stuff. So I learned to love the Goon Show. I think it was Spike Milligan's one. He'd seen something. He goes, he'd seen something happen in front of him, and he said, "But my eyes aren't what they used to be." And I think it was Harry Seacombe said, "No," and he goes, "No, they used to be my ears." So just that sort of. That's wit. Well, that takes us out for the show for today, episode 127. We want to thank you for listening and advise you just to get hold of us. You know how by now. You get hold of me from Twitter, Jack the Insider there. You're going to get a hold of Jack through his page, your blog, and you can get in touch with both of us on the Conditional Release program at gmail.com. Drop us a line if you want to ask some questions, make a comment, or make a severe, withering criticism of us.
Especially if you're going to do that.
Yeah, get stuck in. We love it. So, that takes us out for the show, and we look forward to more of the Two Jacks in a week's time. See you, folks.